I'm going to focus mainly on just energy in this lecture. So when we talk about energy, to realize that what we're talking about is a certain type of work. And one of the best examples is fireflies. Fireflies use light that is coming from an organ near their kind of butt region, and they use it to send a signal saying to potential mates, hey, I'm ready, why don't you come hang out with me? Other animals use chemical signals. So they'll use chemical signals such as pheromones to signal that they're interested in a mate or they're looking for food. Now, the fireflies are interested. What happens is they do a series of chemical reactions in their hind region back here. And in doing those chemical reactions, they actually produce light, just like a flashlight would. What happens with that light, it then produces kind of a pattern that will attract a mate. And if you look closely at this real life picture, you're going to see here is a female emitting light. And then here's the poor male that's being consumed or eaten by the female. So she emitted a signal saying, hey, I'm ready to mate. The male comes running over, and what he finds out is that really she was ready to eat lunch. Now, that is a perfect example of this kind of energy use in nature. And what we're doing is we're going to focus on energy and how we're using it in a cell, the cell of an organism. So energy is the ability to do work. Okay, the capacity to perform work of any type. Every living organism, whether it's a slug or a snail or a redwood tree or a human, requires energy. And again, that is the capacity or the ability to do work. There's two major types of energy. The first one is kinetic energy, which is the energy of motion. When things are moving, for example, a rock rolling down a hill, that is kinetic energy. Heat and light. So if you were to see light coming from a fire, you feel warm when we burn wood. That is kinetic energy. We're also going to be looking at how do we move molecules down a concentration gradient. So how do we go from an area where there's lots of sugar to an area where there's less sugar? That is kinetic energy as well. The second type of energy is potential energy. Potential energy is the stored ability to do work. So it's kind of the potential to do work. And oftentimes potential energy comes from the result of a structure. Molecules can store energy. For example, starches. Starch is like a carbohydrate. Carbohydrates, as we know, are a bunch of sugars. Each one of those sugar molecules represents the ability to generate energy, but it's not being used yet. Therefore, it's the potential to have energy, which is why we love to have carbohydrates. There's also concentration gradients. If molecules are not moving yet, if we create an area with lots of molecules in an area with less molecules, we have the potential now for movement as a result of those differences in concentration gradients, and that's the potential. Now, the big thing about kinetic and potential energy is that they're governed by the two laws of thermodynamics. And you'll study these extensively in other classes, but right now, the only thing that you need the first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So the amount of energy in the biosphere, in the universe, is a constant amount. What form it's in, whether it's potential or kinetic, changes on the millisecond. However, potential or kinetic energy, it's always going to be there. It's just how much of either type. The second law of thermodynamics states that energy transformations increase in disorder. So your room, if it was naturally clean, will always tend to become more and more messy. And that's because that's a law of thermodynamics. It's one of the rules of nature, that we're always going to increase in entropy, which is disorder. And as a result of that, we're going to lose some energy in the form of heat. If we were to look at the example down here on this slide, we're going to see that glucose is being converted into carbon dioxide and water. If you were to look at this, glucose and oxygen gets turned into carbon dioxide and water. I hope you recognize that equation as cell respiration. By doing those chemical reactions, we're generating heat, which is why when your body is using sugar to generate energy, you sweat. And we're also going to be making the ATP. Okay, so that's our energy that we need for muscle movement. Now, chemical reactions fall under one of two categories. whether they are releasing energy or giving off energy, or whether or not they're using energy to happen. If you were to look at a chemical reaction and it is using energy, then you would see something that is called an endergonic reaction. Endergonic reactions where you start with reactants that are going to require energy to come into them in order to make the products. The difference between the reactants and the products is the amount of energy required for this one to happen, for this reaction to happen. Now, the thing about this is that this product is really, really rich in potential energy. Exergonic reactions are what are releasing energy, and they're going to yield products that contain less potential energy than the reactant. So here's our reactant. If you notice, we drop down to a product. In doing so, reactants go to products. We're going to release energy, usually in the form of ATP. The difference, again, between reactants and products, that is the amount of energy that is being released. Now, cells carry out thousands of chemical reactions. Cellular metabolism, as we know it, people say, oh, I have a fast metabolism, that's why I'm skinny. I have a slow metabolism, and that's why I'm fat. That is not metabolism as we know it in biology. Metabolism is simply what chemical reactions are happening inside of an organism at any given time. Now, the thing about the metabolism is it includes both endergonic and exergonic reactions. So when we do an exergonic reaction, we're producing the energy needed for the endergonic reaction. So again, exergonic reactions create the energy needed for endergonic reaction. One of the best energy molecules that we're going to look at in this class is ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. It has 3 phosphates in the tail end of it. So here's our phosphate group 1, phosphate group 2, phosphate group 3. This second and third phosphate are easily broken off, no big deal. It's also made up of an adenine and a ribose sugar. The thing about this is that ATP undergoes chemical change. Now, it's like a $5 bill, if you will. Okay, it's small, it's easy to use, you can buy you things, so it provides a lot of kind of energy for cells. When we look at ATP, we need to look at how does this work. So here is our ATP molecule with the 3 phosphates. We're going to add water, so we're going to do hydrolysis, and we're going to use the water to break the covalent bond between the second and third phosphates. When we break the bond between the second and third phosphates using water, hydrolysis, we're going to be releasing the energy that was stored in that bond. That energy can then be used by a cell to do work. If we want to do the exact opposite, we're going to start with ATP and a phosphate. We're going to take away water. We're going to do a dehydration synthesis, and we're going to end up with ATP. Now, cellular respiration is what actually makes ATP, whereas we're going to be looking at like photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is going to be using ATP. Now, ATP, phosphate group is, it can actually be used as the reactant in an endergonic reaction. So anytime you are adding a phosphate to something, it's called phosphorylation. And so when you do this, we have to remember that the endergonic reactions take in energy, but they allow you to do work. And the 3 major types of work we're going to be looking at is chemical work, which is how we make proteins, mechanical work, which is really movement, and that's how we move our muscles, and then transportation. How are we moving things around? So we're going to be doing a lot of these reactions. We're going to be relying on ATP. One of the major things that allows reactions to happen are enzymes, and I'm going to talk about them separately.